Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast, and my name is Naz. Let's talk about UFC 268. This weekend, the UFC is coming back to New York with a bang, with some special fights. The main fight at UFC 268 is a rematch between Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington. Then the co-main event, a rematch as well, Rose Namajunas versus Weili Zhang. This is a special night of fights, with the main event also opening up with Justin Gaichy and Michael Chandler. We got Frankie Edgar, maybe his retirement fight against Marlon Chito Vera. We got Shane Burgos in the main event as well. And then even in the prelims and early prelims, we have some great fights with Quinta versus Bobby Green, Alex Pereira. Also, like I said, in the early prelims, heavyweight or light heavyweight fight with Jean Vellante coming back to the light heavyweight division, having a couple fights in the heavyweight division, and then coming back. He's just always fun to watch. And then versus Chris Barnett. He's a fun one to watch as well. And for him to go to lightweight, Chris Barnett, both of these guys coming down to lightweight, which I'm just taking in right now. Well, actually on the UFC app, I don't know, this might be a glitch, but it says Jean Vellante is fighting at heavyweight, which he's had some heavyweight fights or light heavyweight fights before. And then Chris Barnett having his heavyweight fights, and he's the funny one because he's a little bit shorter for that weight class. But then now when I look at Wikipedia, it actually says that it's a heavyweight fight. So Jean Vellante staying at heavyweight against the smaller Chris Barnett. That's going to be a fun one to watch, man. It's always fun to watch either one of those men fight. So let's start it off with just a couple of the fights that I mentioned before. We talked about Jean Vellante. Now let's talk about Quinta versus Bobby Green. Bobby Green was having a great run during the quarantine events, as I like to call them, where there was no fans in the building. During that time, he had a couple of fights where he was doing really well. Actually, he was doing a lot better than expected. A lot of his fights were finishing. He was finishing them in a really good way. Some of his last wins were against Clay Guida, Groovy, Lando Venata, Al Patrick. Then he had a couple of losses in 2021 and in October of 2020. Yeah, Bobby Green's always fun to watch. I mean, and then against raging ally Quinta, this will give us a good idea of where both of these fighters are at. And it's gonna be a special one because this is ally Quinta coming back from a little bit of a hiatus. He fought against Dan Hooker, who just recently fought Islam Makhachev. And Dan Hooker and ally Quinta both fought in 2019, which is almost 2 years ago from now. So, I mean, Raging Al always coming back. You know, he's always going to put on a great fight. I think for Ally Quinta, it's really going to be his style is so well-rounded in some aspects where he does have the striking capability, but he usually puts on a pace against a lot of people. I saw the Donald Cerrone and Ally Quinta fight live. You could see in that fight, even though it was a loss, it's all about heart for raging Ally Quinta. And honestly, he really needs the win after this, especially being on the little break that he's had. And it's been since 2019. So he really needs a win. He needs this fight. The next fight that I'm going to talk about, Frankie Edgar versus Marlon Chito Vera. This is slated to be maybe Frankie Edgar's last fight. The last one that he had, it was a flying knee knockout by Corey Sandhagen, who also just recently fought UFC 267. And the knockout was in 2021 in February. And a lot of people were asking for Frankie Edgar to retire at that point. I remember it was like a big deal. And everybody was saying that Frankie Edgar should retire. It was such a brutal knockout. This is not something that we want to see him do. But I think with a little bit of time that has elapsed, a lot of people have forgotten about that fight. They still remember what he did against Pedro Munoz, who he defeated. Also, I think this is just Frankie Edgar trying to really put it together at 135. We all know that Frankie Edgar was at one point fighting at 155 and 145. And he always talked about being the smaller guy. He always talked about being the smaller one in there, and he really he enjoyed that. It was something that I think at one point there was a quote of him talking that when he's talking to his kids about being in the UFC and about being one of the smaller fighters in there, it gave him great pride. And he didn't want to tell his kids that he couldn't do something like win the 145 or 155 pound championship belt. But he's facing someone against Chito Vera, who's put on a little bit of a run. I mean, especially after that Sean O'Malley win, which ended by TKO. But we all know that Sean O'Malley also did have that injury going into that fight. And after a little while, his knee kind of buckled and he won that fight. He won that one fair and square. I know Sean O'Malley always jokes about it being his record being 0 losses. But it was a stoppage and Chito Vera really pounced on him. And that one was in 2020. He did fight against Jose Aldo, who also is coming down to 135 and putting on a little bit of a run. And we all know that Jose Aldo, with the career that he's had at 145, being the 145 pound king, he's always a tough out for anybody. And to have that under your belt, I've talked about this in the last couple of podcasts now, but it's not about the fights that you've won, in my opinion. I mean, yeah, like you get the money and all that kind of stuff. But if we're really looking at this person versus this person, I also like to look at the record, and not just the record of wins, but who this person has faced. Jose Aldo, Sean O'Malley, Davey Grant. These are all big names that Chito Vera has under his belt. And he's seen that look in the cage. Quickly, let's go over the Shane Burgos fight. Shane Burgos facing Billy. Shane Burgos has had, he at one point, and I think this is still the case, but he's at a crossroads now in his career. He was just going after people and he was putting on that pace, and you could see that the striking capabilities that he had was really messing with a lot of people. But then he had that Edson Barbosa fight, which was his last fight at UFC 262, May 15th, 2021. That one got ended by a KO punch in the third round. But even before that, you could see that Edson Barbosa was really bothering Shane Burgos with a lot of leg kicks, and there was a bunch of redness all over his body. And it was just, I think this is a well-deserved break that he's had, even though it was in May. It's been a couple months now, more than a couple months, but it's been a well-deserved break. It's something that he really needed just to reset. And I think this fight against Billy is really going to show us where he's at after that devastating KO punch. He's KO'd a lot of people outside of the UFC and in the UFC. He has a couple decision wins. 5 of his 13 wins are by knockout. 5 of them are by submission, and 3 of them are by decision. He's lost twice by knockout. One was a TKO by Calvin Kattar. And then he also, like I said, lost to Edson Barbosa by a KO punch in that 3rd round. I think this is going to be a great fight. I mean, Shane Burgos, especially in New York, a New York native, is really going to try and put on that show for the fans. And just the striking ability, just the way that he fights is so aggressive, and it's going to be great for the New York crowd. Next fight, the big one, the people's main event, in my opinion, Justin Gaethje versus Michael Chandler. Both of these fighters are almost, they're very similar in the sense that they do have that wrestling background. They really like to strike. They're real, they're real contenders in this 155-pound division, the Shark Tank of the UFC. We look at Justin Gaethje. Obviously, he lost to Khabib Nurmagomedov, where he retired at UFC 254, which was in 2020. I can't believe it. It seems like it's been a while since Khabib Nurmagomedov has fought, but it's the same amount of time that Justin Gaethje has fought. It's been a little while. His last fight was in October 2020, and that one was, I mean, everybody loses to Khabib Nurmagomedov. Most of the division has almost lost it. Khabib Nurmagomedov is not a big, yes, it is a big deal for Khabib Nurmagomedov to win against ex-fighter. But, I mean, Dustin Poirier's lost, Conor McGregor's lost to him. I mean, a bunch of these fighters in this 155-pound division have lost to the 155-pound king in Khabib Nurmagomedov. Before that fight, the real fight that got him to the Khabib Nurmagomedov fight, obviously, was the Tony Ferguson fight, where he stopped him with TKO punches. And after that fight, that was where Tony Ferguson didn't fall off, but he had a string of losses that he's had now. And it was all after that fight. Who knows what the effects were of that TKO loss, especially from a mental aspect. El Cucuy was known as El Cucuy, the boogeyman of that 155-pound division. And for him to lose by TKO punches was a tough one. And I think it may have been the beginning of the end for Tony Ferguson. Who knows where he's at now? Obviously, he's had a string of injuries, especially that weird one where he tripped over a cable at Fox, at the Fox studios. It might have been one of those studios, but he had to get a ACL surgery even before that. Let's go back to Justin Gaethje. Even before that, he fought Donald Cerrone, defeated him with TKO punches. Edson Barbosa, which was a big one in my opinion, because Edson Barbosa, he's just so tough for anybody in that division, especially if you like the stand-up game, which Justin Gaethje loves. Justin Gaethje is known as a wrestler. He's had that wrestling background, but he really likes to stand and bang. If you're listening to this podcast, you already kind of know this. I think the real fight that really gave a lot of confidence to Justin Gaethje and started to take away the highlight part of his career, which was just going after it. I remember watching live the Eddie Alvarez fight. Eddie Alvarez and Justin Gaethje, when they were fighting, they were just going at it. It was all out war on the feet. That was a special fight. I think many people forgot about that one. With Eddie Alvarez, even though it was a loss, it was a straight up war in that fight, and it ended by a knee from Eddie Alvarez in 2017. After that, he fought Dustin Poirier, lost that one. And then the one that gave him that real confidence that I was talking about earlier, I believe, is the James Vick fight, which he KO'd him in the first round. James Vick being massive for that weight division and a really tough person for anybody. Even though James Vick is fighting in other organizations now, at the time, with the attributes that James Vick has, which mainly include the height that I was talking about, he's really tough for anybody at that time. Let's talk about Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler lost his last fight for the UFC belt against Charles Oliveira, the undisputed champion of that 155-pound Shark Tank. I'm going to keep repeating that, but it's such a special division in the UFC. Last win was against Dan Hooker in Abu Dhabi at UFC 257, January 24, 2021. Now with that one, you could see the lights of the UFC, how that they would affect Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler took it in stride, allowed Dan Hooker to really try and hunt him down. And he kept on hunting, circling the cage, and then hit him with that. I believe it was a hook that took Dan Hooker to the ground, and then he ended it with TKO punches. That was a big win, especially for someone who just recently joined the UFC at the time. All the lights, all the cameras, everybody was on Michael Chandler at that point. And it was... it must have been a tough one for him. Before that, defeating Ben Henderson, who was his rival in Bellator, being one of the biggest names in Bellator's history, defeating the likes of Eddie Alvarez while they were in Bellator together in 2013. And a bunch of like Patricky Freire, Benson Henderson, Brent Primus, a lot of these big names in Bellator Michael Chandler has faced. I think for either one of these fighters, I think you can put all bets on it being a striking affair. I give the edge a little bit in power to Michael Chandler, but with those leg kicks that Justin Gaethje has, those are something that he really has to look out for, especially the way that Michael Chandler fights. He has a lot of mobility. He doesn't have a really wide stance. I would say it's a little bit, it's not prime Conor, 145-pound Conor with the extra wide stance, karate stance that Wonderboy Thompson has, but it's a wider stance, and especially with a lot of his power shots, he's really putting a lot of pressure on that front foot. And if Justin Gaethje can compromise that at any point, it's going to cause him real big issues. But if he doesn't, and he's not able to nullify that power, or is not able to take away the mobility of Michael Chandler, you really got to watch out for the power that he possesses. He's just like a little tank in there at 155. Next fight, it's for the strawweight belt. Rose Namajunas, big one against Zhang Weili. This is a big one. Rose Namajunas did knock out Zhang Weili in their last fight. It was by a KO head strike. UFC 261, April 24th, 2021. Ended in the first round, Jacksonville, Florida. It was one of the first fights that were happening in the UFC after the big quarantine. But before that, defeating Jessica Andrade after getting dumped on her head and KO slammed by her in May 11th at UFC 237. That was a big one to come back from because of the fights that she had to initially win the belt against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, defeating her twice. One was to obviously get the belt from Joanna, and then I think a lot of people really wanted to see a second fight because they might have thought that it was a fluke from UFC 217. Then she had to fight Joanna Jędrzejczyk again. and then defeated her by unanimous decision. What a tough fight that was in 2018 for Rose Namajunas. But then after that, getting dumped on her head by Jessica Andrade, the powerhouse at strawweight, and then having to come back and defeating her by split decision at UFC 251 in 2020, then really came into herself by KOing Zhang Weili. Zhang Weili was she's just the big name coming out of China for everybody over there. Won the belt. Had such a spectacular fight against Joanna Jędrzejczyk in 2020. That was also under a Kamaru Usman card. I believe that was also under. No, that was under Stylebender's card. But I just thought there was a little bit of correlation there, but it was actually under Stylebender's card. Yeah, I mean, Weili Zhang, she is just a powerhouse in there. Able to go toe-to-toe with one of the best strikers, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who I believe at one point was the best striker, man or woman, in her heyday. The pinpoint accuracy, I'm not saying power or anything like that. I'm saying pure striking capability. Joanna Jędrzejczyk was one of the best, especially in her heyday. She's also defeated the likes of Jessica Andrade, who I was just talking about, for the championship. This was in between the two Rose Namajunas fights that Jessica Andrade had. She defeated her by KO, TKO. That was in 2019. Everybody thought that she was going to be a long reigning champion. And unfortunately, or fortunately, she got knocked out by Rose Namajunas. I think this is going to be a tough fight for either one of these. But I think that the mental aspect that Weili Zhang is talking about in a lot of the interviews that were after that devastating knockout, where she was talking about how the crowd affected her, how the knockout affected her. She didn't expect to get booed in that arena. A lot of those factors, I think, are going to come in and play a big role in this one. We don't know what the crowd is going to look like in New York. Is it going to be a pro Zhang Weili crowd or a pro Rose Namajunas crowd, who I'm expecting is going to have the crowd behind her? So I think that we'll see. We'll see if Zhang Weili training in Arizona with Henry Cejudo, if that's going to have if that's going to pay its dividends. If she's going to be able to get the mental aspect out of her mind, and not think about all those fans booing. I think she was really surprised about the way that the Americans handled her, especially when she was the champion and she believed that there was millions and millions of people behind her. But in that arena, it didn't look like there was one fan wanting her to win. Okay. Now the crown jewel of the event, Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington 2. Kamaru Usman, he's all about lapping the 170 pounders. This guy's had an amazing career thus far, being put on the pound per pound list as number one, KOing the likes of George Masvidal, Gilbert Burns, TKOing Gilbert Burns, but we all know that piston of a right hand, I believe, got Gilbert Burns, even though Gilbert Burns was putting a pace on Kamaru Usman, he was able to dig deep and take him out in the third round in 2020. Before that, Jorge Masvidal defeated him. That was a quick, short notice fight for George Masvidal. I mean, it was in Abu Dhabi. It was one of the first ones that happened on Fight Island. And at UFC 251, he was able to get that decision win where he kind of pressed him up against the cage and used his wrestling to nullify a lot of the stuff that Jorge Masvidal does. And then in the second one, where he fought Jorge Masvidal, took him out, KO punch. Stylebender talked about the impeccable timing of that punch and the way that he was able to bring down Jorge Masvidal's hand and then get him with that clean piston. A lot has been talked about the striking acumen and the capabilities, the advancement actually that Kamaru Usman has had training under Trevor Whitman. A lot has been talked about that, and I think that first of all, being in a crew of that, like the knowledgeable people in that crew up in Denver, and the also flying, getting out of town, going to a place that is not technically your home, and training under someone so smart like Trevor Whitman, who's training the likes of Rose Namajunas, and others on this fight card, like Justin Gaichy, and then also the Kamaru Usman, training all those fighters. These are all people that are really good with their hands, also have wrestling abilities, but the striking knowledge that Trevor Whitman brings is just something special. You can see it in the small sound bites that he has sometimes with the UFC. I'm not sure if he does that or if he's just preparing for this fight. Din Thomas has been doing a lot of those recently. Before that, he fought Colby Covington. That was a hell of a fight. Colby Covington at one point thought that he broke his jaw. He's now saying that it's not broken. I believe he posted pictures of his x-rays that showed that it was not in fact broken. But it was it was a grueling fight, a kickboxing fight that not many people thought it would happen, but it is something that usually happens when two wrestlers, jiu-jitsu fighters, anybody who are equal in some skills. That's what usually happens. I mean, one weird example is Ben Askren when he fights another wrestler or a jiu-jitsu specialist like Damian Maia. It kind of nullified the grappling and it made it a straight striking affair. So let's look at Colby Covington's record here. The last fight that he's had has been in 2020 with the retired Tyron Woodley, who he TKO'd, and then Tyron Woodley had to tap due to rib injury. I remember him screaming and yelling that his rib was broken, and he was able to take him out there. Before that, he lost that fight against Kamaru Usman, where I was just talking about the devastating fight that was. The way that he lost, he's complaining that the referee, Mark Goddard, stopped the fight too early and didn't let him fight. Even though it was the fifth round, he got taken out at 4 minutes and 10 seconds. He just says that, let me just go to the decision at least. I went all 5 rounds with the possible, at the time he thought, broken jaw. So why not just let him fight? Before that, fighting Robbie Lawler, 2019, RDA, 2018, Damian Maia in 2017. He fights very seldom, but the fights that he does have get a lot of views and get a lot of people to watch. Maybe it's because of the way that he talks, but he's able to get people to watch him. And he doesn't fight that often, but when he does, he puts on a pace on people. He uses that cardio. He uses the capabilities that he has, the natural capabilities. This is not something that can really be taught. But Colby Covington just puts that pace on people. And I think in this fight with Kamaru Usman, the key for him is to introduce some of the wrestling. We know what's going to happen if he goes toe-to-toe with him in striking, because he's not known as a knockout artist. He's really going to have to use his cardio like in his other past fights. Kamaru Usman, I think he wants to make it a striking exchange. He doesn't want this thing to go to the ground. He doesn't want to see what happens. He just wants to make it like the last couple fights that he's had, where he's either knocked out people or won by decision. George Masvidal, Jorge Masvidal, excuse me. He the knockout that he had against him, who is deemed one of the best boxers in the UFC. I'm talking about Jorge Masvidal here. The knockout that he had against him, even though he's in his advanced age, just shows the steps, the leaps and bounds that Kamaru Usman has made. And now he's doing what he's been talking about for a little while, which is lapping people. So again, Colby Covington, I think he's got to put on a pace, but he's also got to see, he's got to explore what happens if he does wrestle, if he does go in for a takedown, if he does put him against the fence, if he uses his grappling abilities, because he's got the cardio for it. He can go like 10 rounds with the cardio that he has. Then Kamaru Usman, I think it's just going to be sprawl and brawl, that old school kind of tactic, maybe staying on the feet, but who knows? I think the wrestling for both of these fighters is not something that has been explored yet, and it can be explored with both of these guys in this fight at UFC 258. Great night of fights. We'll talk about it more, but what a special night for New York. What a special night. The UFC is coming back with a bang. Remember, I think watch the early prelims, watch the prelims, and especially that main event. Stay glued to your television set for that one. Let me know what you think in the comment section below if you're watching this on YouTube or the podcast networks. Again, I really appreciate you listening and taking the time out of your day to hear me talk about this special card. What a treat the UFC is putting on with these cards. And please like, subscribe, hit the bell notification for more videos like this, and then leave a comment like I said before. Also, you can listen to the podcast on the different podcast networks, Spotify, iTunes, all of them, and rate, comment, hit the like button or whatever on those different podcast networks. It really helps out. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you for taking the time. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. Bye.